What's better than talking about a good anime once? Talking about it twice. Summertime Rendering was that good anime stuck in Disney jail for its entire runtime. Even now, basically 4 months after it has finished airing, there is very little availability to watch it legally. With that and this very biased poll I ran, I'm going to assume that most of you haven't watched this fantastic anime just yet. So I consider it my job to tell you why you should watch it and what to expect from it while giving away as little of the story as possible. If you did watch my first impressions video on this anime a long time ago, you know a little bit of what I expected from it, and I have to say it did deliver on those promises. And it definitely deserves to be a contender for Anime of the Year 2022, but not in the way that I originally thought. Summertime Rendering is a story based on a small island where our protagonist Ajiro Shinpei is from. Being away from his home for 2 years, he returns on the news that his childhood friend Kofune Ushio has died in a tragic sea accident. On further investigation though, it was clear that this wasn't just some accident. She was murdered by something that can take on a human form but is clearly stronger. Our protagonist, having the ability to return to a very specific point every time he dies, must uncover the identity of the entities that murdered his childhood friend. A classic horror-based murder mystery is what this show hooks its viewers in on. The forces on the island aren't just big, bad and scary, they're also highly intelligent and adaptable. That being said though, that isn't all this show is either. For the casual enjoyer of all things mystery and horror such as myself, I can say that Summertime Rendering is a joy to experience. The mystery is well written, the twists are unpredictable enough, the horror and suspense is well executed, and the plot is highly engaging all the way through. That being said though, for someone with an inescapable itch for horror and thrill, someone perhaps a little too far down the general horror rabbit hole, I want to warn you that this anime isn't as scary as it is smart, with more focus put not on how scary the monsters can be, but on how our cast can survive despite the overwhelming disadvantages. This is where I think most of the criticism around this anime comes, with the story, while starting out like every other murder mystery, slowly realizes itself as a strategic battle of wits, as well as some real fistfight battles, with the cast going back and forth with the villains instead, which honestly works just as well too. The dilemmas around the information present, knowing what your enemies knows about you, the story almost starts to feel like an RPG with extremely high stakes and life-threatening consequences, coupled with action and direction so good you think you read the genres wrong, is where I have to say I was most impressed with the show. The change in approach to what I expected wasn't a negative for me at all, as it still managed to be most of the things it promised to be while being extremely entertaining instead of extremely suspenseful. The ability of our main character is exactly what it sounds like if you are familiar with Return by Death from ReZero, but even if you aren't, it becomes apparent very quickly just how it works and what its limitations are. The story does it justice in the way that it neither felt too strong nor too weak, and Ajiro Shinpei, our main character, truly has to utilize it to its fullest potential at several points in the story. There are also other abilities so to speak, but all of them feel purposeful and interesting without breaking the immersion of the mystery present. The action is surprisingly fluid, with exciting fight choreography that makes use of the ridiculous physics-breaking abilities our characters possess, and further enhances the story both in ways of hope and despair at the situation present. To put it simply, the story doesn't confine itself and instead branches out to explore new heights, and I personally was a big fan of just what it achieved through that. It didn't go down the path I expected, but the path it did choose, it executed just as well, if not just better. Which is exactly where I must warn you about another aspect of the show that may become clear very soon into the anime. Since the nature of the show is mainly plot driven, it sacrifices what it succeeds in the plot in the form of its characters. If you are the type of person to get overly attached to your favorite characters, this is a cautionary tale. A general heuristic is that the show is the type to give more importance to characters that present more value to the plot, which happens to be something I'm quite fine with personally, but this does come at the cost of some seemingly cool characters feeling a little neglected. I wouldn't go as far as to say that there are bad characters in the show, but do keep in mind, not everyone is the favorite child. This is fine though. I think the story functions perfectly fine with these characters just the way they are, with more focus put on the plot and its resolution. The most important character in the show, Ajiro Shinpei, our protagonist, is probably the best written of them all, having the unique personality of looking at himself objectively in a situation. While the show is an action-packed murder mystery suspense comedy on the surface, the only reason the show feels coherent is due to our main character's personality. Looking at things objectively instead of acting on emotions is what feels like the main point made by the story. Yes, he has powerful allies on his journey, yes, he has returned by death to change the future the way he wants to, but the only reason these things are able to be used to overcome the obstacles he faces is because of how well he uses them. It's a very logical approach to the storytelling where instead of him being protected by the things around him or by simply plot armor, it truly feels like Ajiro Shinpei is working through his difficulties and overcoming them to reach that perfect ending. He's using all the information he has at his disposal objectively and coming up with ways to win, thus making the plot feel that much more satisfying to experience. Despite what I said about the characters not being deep, I quite enjoyed certain characters and their vibe. They lend themselves to some much needed comedy in times of despair, and most of them had their time in the spotlight when it came showtime. I also want to say that this show provided some surprising MVP candidates that you could probably never predict from the start. Also, feel free to call me weird, but I actually liked the Japanese dialect in the show. The Kansai dialect, I believe. Yeah. Everything else in the story I think becomes apparent very early on. The animation is great, the music is eerie and adds to the suspense, and I personally am a big fan of the first ending. Combine all of that with a romantic subplot and what I like to call tasteful fan service, and you have summertime rendering. In conclusion, the whole story feels jam-packed to the brim with suspense, mystery, and action, and to put it simply, even if the writing of the show isn't at the masterpiece level of storytelling, it definitely felt great to watch. Not every author can create a masterpiece, but I think Yasuki Tanaka, the author of this anime, definitely wrote the best goddamn story he could write. In just 25 episodes, it provided me with a fantastic engaging story with a really interesting plot and an ending to give closure far better executed than I ever hoped it could be. Like really, the last few episodes were so goddamn good. While I think it might have missed out on some potential with how scary and detailed it could have been with the monsters, it is also my opinion that the direction the show went was still absolutely great, with an emphasis more on entertainment rather than deep storytelling. If you are a ratings person, I think my opinion is that summertime rendering is both underwatched and underrated according to the scores on my anime list, but honestly, if you watch it and tell me that it was a genuine 8.5 for you, I wouldn't argue with that logic either. A wise man once said the best way to watch summertime rendering was completely blind, and the second best way to watch it was to watch this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'm glad to see which one you've chosen. I truly hope this anime turns out to be as enjoyable for you as it was for me. If you guys have watched it, let me know what you thought of it down below. I would love to have that discussion. As usual guys, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Peace.